Welcome everyone to the episode number 15 of In Focus, the program where you can ask any Sony camera related questions, and we are here for you to help you if we can, of course. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ranieri Pallavicini, and I am with the CET Customer Engagement Team with Sony. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get notifications next time we are doing these shows. So without losing any time or any more time, we are going to talk about today how to choose the best lens for you. And we are going to be talking about many different lenses and many different effects, how the lenses are made, but affect your photos. So my first topic is introduction to lenses. So what are lenses? Lenses are like your eyes, and your brain or your head is like the actual camera. I say these samples like that to people so they know that your eyes, they have a pupil and things like that, and that's the aperture of the lens and so on. But what are lenses? Lenses are like a toolbox. Different things that you're going to do, you're going to grab different tools for different projects that you are going to be doing. That's why we have so many lenses and so many to choose from. We have a 50 millimeters, 2.5, we have a 2.8, we have a macro, we have 1.4, 50, 1.2, and so many 50 millimeters, and then 85 millimeters, and then 70 to 200. And there's a lot of numbers. So I'm gonna try to go as simple as possible. I'm gonna trying to show you what different lenses do different type of photography, right? And we are trying to learn that. So because when you have that knowledge, then you can make a fantastic decision or educated decision for the next lens that is in your mind. So in the meantime, we are going to start talking about, let's say, a wide angle lens. When they mention wide angle is a wide angle of view. So when you put that lens to the camera, you can actually see a wide angle of view, right? The focal length number is low. So if I grab, let's say, a 14 millimeters like this one, right? So a 14 millimeters, give me 1 second, let me check here my other screen. So a 14 millimeter lens, the focal length is 14 millimeters. And because, so let me explain what is what is focal length. So here on this camera have, by the way, this is the brand new Alpha 7.4, Alpha 7.5 camera. Fantastic. I'll tell you a little bit about at the end. But anyway, this symbol right here is where the sensor is placed. So in this lens that is on this camera right now is the 24 millimeters. So the focal length of this lens is 24 millimeters. So the distance between this focal plane, which is where the sensor is, to the noodle of the lens is literally 24 millimeters. So the shorter that number is, the wider the angle of view, or the wider, the lower the focal length, the wider the angle of view. And so the angle of view is kind of an effect of the focal length. So if you have a 600 millimeter lens, the focal length is 600. So what is the effect of that? That the angle of view is very, very narrower. Something that far away, you can bring it much closer. You see it much closer because of the focal length, which is, this is another example. So let's say that I'm the sensor of the camera and I will cross my hands. So I will cross my hands. So this, where they cross, that middle point, that's called what we call the noodle point of the lens. So the closest is to you is the wider the angle. So from the cross point and above and forward is the angle of view. So the shorter it is, that cross point to you, which I'm the sensor, the wider angle I'm going to see. Now, if you grab a different lens, right, like a big lens, 600 millimeter lens. So the noodle point is 600 millimeters from the sensor, right? So because it's very long, again, I'm the sensor, so I'm going to go on that cross point very far away. That's why this whole thing is the lens. That's why it's a long lens, right? Because it's 600 millimeters from the sensor. That's the focal length. In effect, you're going to have different angles of view with different focal length. So I hope I didn't confuse you. So shorter, like 14 millimeter lens, is going to look very wide angle of view, and the higher that number is going to, you're going to see narrower and narrower and narrower, and then of course as an effect you're going to see that subject much closer to you. So again, wide angle lens for different things. When would you use a wide angle lens? When you need to fit a lot of scenery onto the frame, literally into the frame. Like I use wide angle lenses. So let me change to the laptop and let me show you a couple of lenses that I use for. So let me just go here. This picture is made with a 14 millimeters lens. This was in Iceland, and I choose 14 millimeters because the aperture of this lens is 1.8. This is the G Master 1.8 lens, and definitely I love it because I fit a lot of stars and Milky Ways and things like that right into the image, right into the image. So that being said, I'm going back to, let me keep talking about the lenses. Let me tell you a little bit about, on wide angle lenses, distortion and compression. I'm going to talk a little bit about distortion and compression. And I'm going back to the camera. Be careful when you're doing, let's say, portraits. So you can use a wide angle for portraits, but make sure you are far away from the subject. They are not the best for portraits because they can introduce something is called barrel distortion, right? I'm talking about an ultra wide angle lens or a wide angle lens. Again, you can do portraits. It's not really made for that. Because if you get closer to the subject, look what it could happen. So let me put here a picture of me, and hopefully you guys can see it. And this lens is, this picture is very distorted because I'm taking a picture of me very close to the ultra wide angle lens. And yes, this lens was a 14 millimeter, lens. And then this one is exactly the same, 14 millimeters. But and then this picture is a lot more natural to my face, right? Why? Because I took that picture with a lens with a 70 to 200 lens, right? With a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And I took it about 70 millimeters. That's why a 24 70 millimeter lens is also very good for portrait. You can take pictures at 50, you can take pictures a 70 for portraits, and so on. So basically, here on this picture, I have a lot less distortion than the previous pictures, right? Than the previous pictures. So this is barrel distortion. So now we're going to talk a little bit about compression when you use an telephoto lens. And I'm going still here on the computer, and here you can see, let me put it, I haven't put the picture yet. Here, you can see this bear, and you can see the compression in the back. And that compression is because I'm using a 600 millimeter lens. The compression is kind of flat in that background, and it's just beautiful because it popped the main subject pop, and your eyes goes to what is sharp and what is bright first, correct? So are you guys are seeing the pictures? Let me see what is in the chat. Give me 1 second. What is in the chat? There's a delay there, they're telling me. Let me see. Let me see. Okay. So again, if you guys have more questions about distortion, just figure it out. What is it that you want to do? And then pick up the focal length that is better for you. A lot of people think, oh, you know, a 50 millimeter, let's say 1.2 is beautiful lens, which it is beautiful lens, is basically the flagship 50 millimeters that we have. But then many people don't shoot at 1.2, which that lens should, allows you to photograph at f1.2. So then why are you buying a lens of 1.2 lens if you are not shooting at 1.2? You can buy a 51.4, or you can buy a different 50. Again, 1.8. Again, you can buy, is depending of the usability that you are going to use it for. That's when you need to basically make the decision which lens are you going to get. Then let me talk a little bit about size and weight, because that's a big one. That's a big one, size and weight. And let me start for the 70-200, right? So this is the 70-200 f4. So this is the 70-200 f4. And look how small is this lens. And again, f4, and I'm going to show you a 70-200 f2.8. So let me see if we have it here. Okay, perfect. So look at the size difference, right? So one is f2.8 and the other one is f4 right here. And now why is a size difference? Well, because the 2.8 lens is going to have a more glass inside, because allows you to gather. So this lens gathers basically 2 times as much light as the f4. So because this lens allows you to gather 2 times as much light, is a lot bigger, because it has to have more glass, because opens a lot more in the inside. So it has to have more glass to allow that amount of light to pass through the lens and basically hit the sensor, correct? Also, because has more glass, now it is heavier. This lens is much heavier than this, little f4 lens, right? Now, this is obviously we're comparing kind of the same focal length here, basically the same focal length, right? 70-200, 70-200. But what about when I compare, let's say I'm going to compare 70-200 with a different lens, with, let's say, 1635. Well, the 1635 is a 2.8 lens, but this 70-200 is basically heavier than the 1635 because also, again, has more glass to be able to reach up to 200 and all of that, all the way from 70 to 200, even though it's f4. On this one, that is f2.8. And the reason is because the focal length or the angle of view, the change of the angle of view from 16 millimeters is only up to 35. So 16 to 35 is a short range. And because of that, even though it's a 2.8 constant, which means that if you zoom in and zoom out, that aperture doesn't vary. It just stays at 2.8 if you want to. If you can, of course, you can step it down, this lens, and put it at f11, f4. Zoom in and zoom out when you do it manually is not going to change the aperture. And the reason I mentioned that is because some lenses, let's say like a kit lens, right? Like this lens right here. So this lens, yes, at the wider angle of view is 28 millimeters of the focal length, but when I zoom in all the way to 70, I lose light. So it starts at 3.5 here, 3.5, and when I zoom into 70, close down to 5.6. So this is not a constant aperture. This is not all the way through wider aperture. You know, that aperture, it doesn't change. I'm sorry, it does change. On this lens right here, it doesn't change because it's all the way through 2.8 is called constant aperture, and this one doesn't change, f4 and the f2.8 and so on. So again, now if I'm comparing that to a prime lens, let's say this 85 millimeters, again, the size is going to be very different between a prime lens than a zoom lens. Why? Well, because they're totally different. A prime lens, it has only one focal length. So usually, because it's a prime lens, allows you to have more aperture. In this case, it does. So this lens is the 85 millimeters GM2, which allows you to go to 1.4 aperture. So allows you to shoot in 85 millimeters at 1.4, while this one, the maximum aperture of this lens is f4 in this case, or 2.8, or whatever, you know, whatever the lens is. One of the main differences as well is that, again, if you want to zoom in, you can't because it's only 85 millimeters. So you would have to go back or go forward physically yourself. But also it gives you something that the other one doesn't give you, and it's the aperture of the lens. So this aperture, again, like I said before, is f1.4, and it gives you different things. You know, it can focus probably a little bit faster sometimes because it's less glass. Sometimes it's more glass. This is probably close in size to the one that I was pointing here. Very, very close in the weight, but not in the size. This is much smaller because it is a prime lens, right? So this is bigger. And of course, if I compare it to the 2.8, it is much, much larger lens, right? Much larger lens. Of course, this is more specific, and you will buy something like this when you are shooting from that distance, and it's kind of the perfect distance, the one that you like to photograph, or you like to, or you need that distance. So you say, you know what, I'm not going to spend my money in a zoom lens because I'm always, and I love the look of this lens, and I need this lens for specific things. That's when you would go for a prime lenses, correct? So again, sizes and weight, very, very different. So this is a 300 millimeter f2.8, and of course it's going to be heavier because it has more glass. It has a lot more glass inside than, let's say, a prime lens 14 millimeters. This is also a prime lens. This is also a prime lens, but this is only, the focal length is only 14 millimeters, okay? And of course, this is 1.8, even though you gather more light with this 1.8, the focal length is very, very wide, totally different than, let's say, this 300 millimeters, right? And again, same thing with the 600, you gather less light with this lens because it's a f4 than this light, right? You gather double of light with the 2.8 compared to the 600 millimeters. The difference is that this is way bigger lens and much more glass. How come it doesn't gather double of light than this 300 that has less glass? Well, it doesn't, because now here you have a 600 millimeters, the focal length, and it's much, it get you much closer to the subject than the 300, basically double. So you are doubling the focal length. That's why you need such a massive amount of glass to be able to reach 2 times the distance, I would say, to reach than compared to the 300. So on the 300, you reach half of the distance. That's why you have less glass, even though you have more light on the 2.8 compared to the f4, f600 millimeters. I hope I didn't confuse you. I know it's a lot of information, but I'm sure you are getting it, and feel free to ask me any questions, I have here a different lens. I have here the 28 to 70 millimeter lens, and this is the f2.0, which is 2 times as much light than the 2.8, right? And then many more times compared to the 5.6. So this is also 28 to 70 millimeter lens, right here. The difference is that this one starts at 3.5, the aperture, and finish at 5.6 when you zoom in. Guess what? This is a monster compared to this one in size, right? In size, right here. But guess what? This one is constant aperture at f2.0. So even though you zoom in and zoom out with this lens, you don't lose light at all. While with this one, not only that don't lose light, but you have many times more light than this kit lens. So again, this is a good lens by any means. This is a good lens. It's sharp, do the job, but of course has limitations. One of the limitations is the size of that lens, right? So let's move around. I think I talk quite a bit about sizes and weight and why that is happening. Sometimes for the more focal length, usually is going to be a bigger lens and it's going to be a heavier lens, even though has quote unquote less aperture than the shorter lenses, okay? So let's change to aperture differences and what that does to the picture. So if I have the kit lens, let me go back to the kit lens, to the 28 to 70 lens, and I'm taking a portrait at 70 millimeters, I can, but my aperture will be at 5.6, which is not bad at all. It's just that it's 5.6. So I will show the background a lot more than if I have a wider aperture. So if I am comparing it to this one, this is the f2.0. Here I'm gonna blur out the background a lot more when I put it to 70 at the same distance that I'm on this one. So because remember, because you get closer to the subject, you always also blur out the background more. So at the same distance, this one is gonna destroy this one in the sense that, you know, of course is a much you know, it costs a lot more than this one, but also it's a much sharper lens and is faster focusing and has less chromatic aberration and has it gathers a lot more light and blur much more the background, and so on and so on and so on, and different things, right? That's why you are paying, more for a constant aperture lens than a lens that is variable aperture when you zoom in or zoom out, if that makes sense. So the difference, let's say another difference here. So let me grab this Carl Zeiss lens, and this is an f4 constant, and of course, because it's a wide angle lens, 16 to 35, the more wide angle you go, so the focal length, the lower the number on the focal length, in this case 12 millimeters or 14 millimeters or 16 millimeters or 20, is more difficult because the lens designed is more difficult to blur out the background than a telephoto lens. Much more difficult. So let me put it here. Let me pick up the 70 to 200. So I put the 70 to 200. So even though that this is a f2.8, or I can pick up the f4, it doesn't matter. I can put this lens at 200 millimeters, so I know this is constant aperture, so I'm not going to lose any light if I put it at f2.8 and I zoom in. But let's say that I put this lens at f11, but I am at 200 millimeter lens. So f11, 200 millimeters. If I focus on something about 6 feet, I will still blur out the background much more than this lens. Let me grab another lens. Than this lens, which is 2.8. So 2.8 lens, 16 to 35. So I put this at 35 and I put it at 2.8. And this lens at 200 f11, it will still blur out the background a lot more. Now you would ask me why? Well, because I'm shooting at 2.8. Well, because the more focal length, the more compression I will have to the background. It will compress the background because of the focal length, if that makes sense. And the opposite applied. The wide angle I go, the more wide angle I go, the more difficult to blur out the background, or I can say the more wide angle or the less the focal length, it is more, the depth of field will increase. That means I will have more sharp image, acceptable sharpness from the foreground all the way to the background. It is easier for a wide angle or ultra wide angle to do that. It's easier than a 600 millimeters. If I focus with the 600 millimeters something, I would have to close it like basically all the way to f22 or something like that in order to have more depth of field, because it's again the opposite apply. Having a ultra telephoto, like a super telephoto, like a 600 millimeters, is very easy to blur out the background. No matter what aperture you put, I can put this at f11 and still blur the background beautifully, right? Of course, it will make it more blurry if I photograph at f4, of course. But I'm saying the opposite applied as well. Very difficult to have everything sharp with that lens because of the focal length is a greater focal length or more telephoto, right? I hope any questions that you guys have, okay, for a creator. F4. Yeah. So Chona, if I want to answer this question, let's say lower aperture f2.8, but they are doing more video than photo. Yeah, for video it's a little bit more critical. It applies. What I'm talking about, it applies for video and photography. Just be aware that, you know, yes, it's a good question, and if I understand it correctly, just make sure you have covered your depth of field, whatever you are shooting, so they are in focus. Because if you are shooting all the time at 2.8 for video, yes, you're gonna have a very nice background because you have a very shallow depth of field, but the person or the people can go out of focus quicker because you are in video. Now you are moving, or the subject is moving. So you have to be very, very careful with that. So it's probably better to shoot at f4 or 5.6. It just depends what you are shooting. A lot of people, you know, think, oh, you know, I'm gonna shoot at 1.8, and that's okay if it's only one person, because the cameras can track you very, very fast now and follow your eyes and blur out the background. But when you start including 2 people and 3 people, forget about it. You have to close it down to increase that part that is in focus, or you increase the depth of field. You have to increase the depth of field, otherwise one other person, one or the other, will be out of focus, if that makes sense. So aperture difference on different lenses, as I said, you have to get what you're going to shoot the most. Don't think, oh, wider aperture is better. Yeah, it might be better for some people, but not for other people. Why I say that? Well, this is a 70-200 f2.8, and this is a 50-150 f2. Well, it's a bigger lens. So for people that want to get more reach, it is not a better lens. The better lens here will be the 70-200 because it gets more reach. Now, why this lens is kind of bigger if you got less reach? Well, it's bigger, you got less reach, because this lens gathers 2 times as much light than this one. This is a f2 constant aperture, and this one here is a f2.8 aperture. So that's why, again, it has to be wider and bigger lens to be able to gather more light in comparison to this one right here, which is f2.8. So again, you are going to buy different lenses for different things. So we have a lot to talk about lenses, and for next episode, we're gonna be the continuation of this video. Next episode, we're gonna talk about how to select your focal length for different things that you are doing, of course, right? We're gonna talk about understanding what focal length does. I already touched a little bit about the focal length, about the compression, and I touched a little bit about that. I'm gonna touch about how, or what is the most natural lens, or focal length, I'm sorry. What is the most natural focal length that you can use to have less distortion in a picture, right? And then we're gonna talk about ultra wide angles, what is a rectilinear and a spherical distortion, and all of that. So for this show, we already are 30 minutes, and we're gonna leave it up to here, up to this point. And then the next episode, we are also going to talk about different tier of lenses, the Sony tier lenses, right? Like the car size, what they have, or what the G Master has that the G does, that the G Sony lenses have, and what the standard Sony lenses don't have that the other one does, and so on, right? So for now, I think it's a lot of information, and I hope I didn't confuse you guys. But I know you guys are. You can go back and watch it again, and feel free to ask me any questions, basically about any lens, and I will do my best to answer those questions for you. Again, this is like a series of live streams talking about lenses. I haven't finished talking about lenses. Hopefully we can finish it in the next one. I'm sorry, like in 2 or 3 more episodes. Again, any questions, feel free to drop it in the bottom. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, and I will be here for the next episode talking about lenses and also what are my favorite lenses that I use for different things. I show you a little bit of photos today and what distortion does and so on, but we will keep going over those different pictures. And let me just read one more time. If you guys have any questions, give me 1 second to see. Great explanation. Thank you so much. No, there's no more questions. Thank you so much, guys. We are here until the next episode. Again, my name is Ranieri Pallavicini, and feel free to contact us for any help. Thank you so much. Keep creating, keep filming, keep taking pictures with the best attitude, and things good will happen to you. Until the next one, bye-bye. See you soon.